Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Veil, a podcast on psychic protection, spiritual hygiene, and navigating the ebbs and flows of the healing journey as you learn to master both your sovereign and shadow selves. My name is Lauren on Earth, your host, and I'm really happy to be back. I took a little bit of time off, pre-recorded a couple of sessions. So here we are. We're back in the States, back in Denver specifically. And I thought that I would probably most likely be talking about my ayahuasca experience, which is where I was in May after leaving Tulum. And then as it got closer to recording, I kind of felt like I wanted to take it in a different direction. But it's kind of all connected because really what I was clearing in ayahuasca is what I'm going to be talking about today. And that is attachments, and more specifically, entity attachments. And so we've talked about on previous episodes underworld beings, dark force beings, all of the different beings that exist in the different dimensions and how to identify them. But what happens when they attach to us, or when they've created a home within our body, within our consciousness? What do we do then? So that's what this episode is really going to be about: entities, attachments, and sharing also some of my own personal experiences, as well as some client experiences as well, especially two that literally just happened this morning where I'm like, this is fitting. I feel like this needs to be part of it. So I'm going to just first define entity, like what an entity is, because I think the general definition and our definition here in the spiritual community is a little bit different. An entity really is just something that exists separately from other things and has this clear identity of its own. And it can have a positive or a negative connotation to it. I'm technically an entity. You're technically an entity. My business is an entity. I'm sure you've heard, businesses and corporations be called entities. But in the spiritual community, I feel like we generally have this idea that, and we define it as this service to self, more negative of a connotation around it, of a being that feeds off of our life force energy in some way, shape, or form. And we know that this is who they are. They're parasitic from previous episodes where I've talked about the dark forces and the underworld. So if you haven't given those a listen, I would highly recommend just adding that, whether it's before or after. But it helps to better understand what I'm talking about as we now navigate into, okay, well, they're in me, they're connected to me, and what does that mean, and what do I do about that? So I apologize if I'm repeating myself a little bit for those who have listened, but just to give a little bit of a recap, when I say entity in this podcast, I'm talking about a lower spirit who is disconnected from source and life force energy, who is parasitic, and who uses manipulation to get what they want. And you might have heard me use the term imposter spirit, maybe in session, maybe in class. And what I mean by that is just an entity or a human that is saying something, behaving, expressing themselves in a way that goes against not even their true nature, but they're just not embodying or behaving in accordance with who they're making you think that they are. My ex-mentor is a really good example of this. She's an imposter. She's not a healer. She's pretending to have abilities, pretending to love us, to care for us, pretending to work with the light. Most healers in the mainstream space are imposters in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes entities are going to trick you and make you believe they are someone else. A really good example of this is Archangel Michael and Jesus. Like, all of these imposter Archangel Michaels, right? It's like, and then you think you're connecting to Archangel Michael and you think he's helping, but in reality, it's a demon or whatever, an entity. And it's not Archangel Michael at all. That's an imposter. A healer who is claiming that they can do all of these things and help you and saying they're doing it, but they're not. That's an imposter. Some entities are not imposters and they really don't care if you know who they are or not. And they're going to continue to get what they want and do what they want with your life force energy, your energy body. The thing is, we can't see it and they don't want us to see it. So there is a process that we have to go through oftentimes to be able to identify it. And this is, also kind of part of the light process as well, where it's not always, or in session, right? It's not always, okay, there's an entity and we know it's there and we're just going to remove it. And then you go on your merry way. There's always a reason as to why this entity has attached. So when I'm clearing entities and I have a method, there is an art to it. It doesn't always look like, okay, we enter into session, we know we have this entity, we remove it, and then you go on your merry way. Sometimes it takes some work, and they also want to hide because if we see them, then we might take action and do something about it. And then they no longer have a home within you. They don't want that. So they block themselves from being seen in so many ways, whether that's energetically or through the mind, or they bury themselves deep in your consciousness. So with that said, most of us on this planet have entity attachments, period. I personally had thousands, some that were very, very deeply ingrained, some that were very ancient that I've been carrying for a while that were very hard to get out, and others that were sent to me in this lifetime by you know who, amongst others. And sometimes there were like hundreds of entities at once that we're clearing. Like, there's just so many different things that I've seen, but we all have them. I don't want to say every single person on this planet, but majority of people do. And sometimes they are attached in the outer layers of the consciousness. So it can be very easy to spot when someone has an entity attachment, attached to their auric field or the energy body, because you can feel it immediately. Whereas others, they have them, but it is deep and it is hidden, and it's not something that you can necessarily pick up on immediately. And so the more you do the shadow work and the deeper you go, and you're working through these traumas and the emotion and everything that has, you've not been able to process over a very lengthy amount of time. As we go deeper, then we start to see these more ingrained entity attachments. And so it might not be so obvious to you, but it's there and the signs are there. Sometimes you just don't always know what to look for. Like, an example of clairvoyance being blocked and you can't figure out why. And most likely I will find something in there, whether it be a ton of AI that was created by the entity or the entity itself. So sometimes the entity attachment is coming from the external, and sometimes it's internal. So what do I mean by that? sometimes our shadow selves, right? The unhealed parts of us that feel unloved and unworthy, that's the entity that you're feeling or sensing in your field, versus other times it is a being that is external from you. So let's just give an example of, okay, let's say you have a reptilian attachment. There's a reptilian in your field, in your consciousness that you gave permission to for whatever reason at some point in time. There's no separation, right? At the end of the day, entirely. So there is a match and a resonance between you and the reptilian being, but different souls. That's its own entity. You are your own entity, versus sometimes your shadow self is in so much pain and kind of like has manifested as an entity. And so it's kind of important also to identify the difference there, which is really easy for me, because it's like it's either the same soul, it's the same frequency blueprint, or it's not. And if you don't know, just ask and really get in the habit of asking questions when you're doing this work, because it's if we don't, then we assume, and we're assuming based on our ego, based on our programming. And so I'm a big advocate of asking the questions you need to ask to get the utmost clarity. I have two examples of shadow selves that are the entities. Right now, I have a friend who is going through a breakup, and part of the attacks are the shadow self entity version of the ex-partner. And then I have a client that I've been working with, and we've been doing a lot of clearing in the lineage, and her son I saw this entity attachment, and I started to realize, like, oh, this is him, this is his shadow. It's not separate from him. And when that happens, we can't just I don't really just like extract the entity and goodbye. Anyway, there's more to it than that. Sometimes that works. Most of the time, there's more to it. But when it's you can't just up and remove it. You have to go through this really, intense, I don't want to say it always has to be intense, but yeah, process of deep transformation where you're alchemizing and transforming and helping this version of you that has been through difficulties. Like, we have to acknowledge that and help this part of you heal and release and process and move through that pain. And then you begin to transform that energy into something else, into light, back into, who you are at your core. So we can't extract you. And speaking of extractions, very rarely, okay, let me back up. When there is someone comes to me with an entity attachment, I always need to get a better understanding of what it is, where it's come from, how long it's been there, and what the process, like the highest timeline process is of the removal and the healing. And sometimes it takes time. I've had attachments that I've known about for a year that I wasn't able to get to. Like, I was trying and doing all of the things that I needed to do and following the steps that I needed to take, but it was so strong or so deeply embedded that it took time. And one, I can remove the entity for you, but if you don't have, your practices, if you're not dedicated to the work, if you're continuing to fall back into old patterns, it's really likely that the entity will come back. And then you just kind of wasted $200 with me, So instead of doing it that way, and sometimes it is the entity comes out immediately, and that's that. And that's awesome. sometimes that's not the case. And instead, we have to really work on what it is that attracted the entity in the first place. Because if we just we know the entity is there, but we keep clearing out the system, cleaning out the system, the beliefs, the emotions, the pain, the ancestral stuff. Now the entity has nothing to hold on to anymore. The contracts are void. So it's one, sometimes it leaves on its own, or now it's time to clear it and it's gone for good. And oh my gosh, all of this other stuff, right? That was there to begin with, now that's gone as well. So that's kind of how I work. But again, it really depends on the situation. I will just recommend like really making sure you have the proper tools in the foundation before starting to clear entities, because they, especially if they're higher dimensional entities, they can see more than you can. And yeah, they also all kind of work together. So it's just important to be prepared. So for me personally, the majority of the attachments that I had were external. Yes, my shadow, when I first started doing this deeper shadow work, she was mean, she was angry, she didn't want to participate in the work that I was doing. There were definitely times where I self-sabotaged and where I let this emotionally charged version of me take over. But most of what I've cleared within my own system came from something external. Going back to the cult, obviously, there's, I don't like blame. I don't think there's I personally don't feel like I should be blaming myself or them. It just is. This is just what we all chose to experience together. Obviously, I'm aware now that this was serving a much higher purpose, right? I spent most of my life thinking that I was a bad person, that I must have done really horrible things to go through what I'm going through. Like, how is all this stuff in my system? I don't understand. And wasn't a bad person. And I, one, agreed to this mission, right, of being connected to this group for a very long time. The number I got being 16,000 years, right, of trying to get out of this. Because one, it was supporting my own soul growth, right? I chose to descend into the underworld, into the depths of darkness, to make my way and find my way back to myself. That is a major, massive initiation. I chose to undergo that. In that time, I experienced evil. I experienced love. I experienced separation. I experienced unity, all of the things. And this cult, they used a lot of dark magic. Obviously, the AI, the black magic, and also sending me entities and other types of beings that were harming and, making me sick. So for some of us, especially if you've been in a cult in a past life, or you were in the mystery schools, or you feel at your core like you have been here on earth for a very long time, and you're playing something out, maybe similar to me, where I know there's a bigger meaning for this. And whether you let them in because you were manipulated, or because you were consciously aware, like there's definitely been some lifetimes that people have lived where they knew they were dabbling in darkness and were choosing to do it anyway. It's karmic law. You got to repay that at some point, and not repay, but it's going to come back. And for a lot of people, it's coming back in this lifetime, and they have to deal with it. And also for a lot of people, they're still in denial and they're still dabbling. And eventually the karma is just not going to be pretty. I mean, I'm thinking about my own karma, and I didn't do anything to that degree by any means. But going through my karmic clearing was really rough. So wishing them the best when they get to that point, when they decide that this darkness is no longer serving them. So for anyone who is having trouble with accepting and, wanting the revenge and the justice, it's going to come. So don't worry about it. So what happens is we have given permission, again, in some way, shape, or form, to these entities to come into our field, to be connected to us. It's not always conscious. So they've created this entire system, which I like to call society, this entire belief system that we've got caught in. And they manipulate us and deceive us into saying yes to them. So, for example, they as in, I feel like the reptilian Anunnaki groups have created this society of suppression, of, you're never going to be good enough. And when you're in a low state of self-worth like that, you're more easily manipulated because you're not in your power. And so it's easier for them to creep on in and hook in. And so, over many lifetimes of reinforcing these systems and using mind control to play on our emotions, our pain, trap us in karmic cycles, using these, I like to say methods of sophisticated torture, they've abused the law of consent. They've abused so many, so many universal laws and things that are put in place to support harmony. They just really just bulldoze through and don't care, to get us to separate from God, from ourselves, to make us believe that we're unworthy. So we kind of unconsciously, in a way, agree to this because we don't know any better, or we can't see because we've been cut off from our gifts. And so that's kind of how I see everything as to why and how, we got here. And they do get that permission, but it's not conscious consent. And for some, yeah, they did give conscious consent, like I just said, they knew they were dabbling in something dark and were involved willingly, probably not knowing the extent to what they were getting themselves into, because there's never full transparency when you're dabbling in the dark. We're experiencing, it's not even just duality, there's more dark than light. So yeah, there's not full transparency. And yeah, they've tampered with our sovereignty and our sovereign mind, and have manipulated humanity to be in consent and authority with their forces and these twisted versions of laws. And I saw this story share the other day, and it said, do what's right, not what's allowed. And it just kind of made me think of this episode. And it's so true. It's like throughout history, every single person or group that has tried to help, right? Like I'm thinking of Nazi Germany and anyone who was giving innocent people a safe space to live, they're wrong. Like, I don't think so, right? Anyone trying to help free slaves, the government decides they're bad. It's such insane manipulation, to the point where so many people don't even realize they're being manipulated. It's like they think that they're not, but they still are. It's really, really deep. So again, sometimes these entity attachments are very deep, and they're connected to these beliefs that the dark forces have helped to create over time. And we do have free will, and we we are and should be sovereign beings, but right now in this reality, we are not completely sovereign. And we are in this process of waking up to that fact. And it's going to take time to achieve complete sovereignty and full soul purification. So the law of consent, also saying sovereignty over one's own body. Yeah, there's beings that have completely disregarded that. And okay, sometimes, okay, sure, we said yes at some point, or we didn't see it and we weren't aware. And now we're changing that narrative and we're deciding, hey, this doesn't feel good anymore. I no longer grant you access to me. And even though you're declaring that, sometimes words aren't enough. And sometimes it takes more than intention to actually get this thing to leave. I have, like, the amount of fighting that I've had to do over my own consciousness. Like, there have been times where I can't even believe the fight that these beings put up to stay somewhere that is not theirs, where they are not welcome, like having to fight for my own sovereignty. It was ridiculous to me. And it can be very frustrating, and I know maybe some of you have felt that before, where it's like, just get out. Like, you don't belong here. And the fact that, you're not respecting that, and not only that, but fighting and attacking to stay, it's like, ew. So sometimes with these entities, we need support. And whether, again, that be plant medicine, like ayahuasca has helped me remove some of these attachments, that there were times too where I'm like, no human could have ever done this. Like, I needed the medicine. I needed it. There was no way a healer, at least anyone that I knew, would have been able to do for me what I needed to pull out of my system. So sometimes, it is the plant medicine that's going to help. Other times, it is a healer, and then it's you as well, right? But it takes definitely skill building. And the only reason that I pulled out most of them myself was because this is my work and I needed to learn how to do it. But for some of you, your energy is best spent elsewhere. And that's where, you still have to do the work, but you don't have to go through like a training in the same way that I did. So going back to, okay, I recognize that there is an attachment. What do I do? And how sometimes it's just not enough to declare it, to speak it into existence. It's definitely a positive move in the right direction. But for most of us, there are so many traps, cages, structures, artificial intelligence that's in the way from you being able to do this, or not in the way, but almost like has to clear first. It's like they don't want you to see, so they put up all of these walls and all of these blocks, so it makes it hard. And even in a session this morning with my client, we were working through trying to identify a belief, and some time goes by and some clearing is happening, and she was like, wait, what are we doing? And I'm like, oh, I've been here before, where you're trying to work through something in the mind and you're just hit with these bouts of confusion, right? It's programming to get you to divert, to not go after what it is you're trying to identify. And it's the same with the entities. They put up all of these walls and these trap doors and these wormholes, so you get lost and you're not able to actually find them. And there's that. And then, karmic baggage. You've got to go through that first. And there's something that needs to resolve before you're able to release this attachment. And, New Age says, oh, to get from point A to B, just quantum jump and you just visualize the timeline. It's like, no, you have to abide by karmic law. And that's one law that they haven't really been able to manipulate. Like I said, the karma will come, but you can't just bypass. And if you think you have, then the entity probably is still there. I don't know. But let's say you're, you know, you are serving the highest good. You're on this collective mission, but you're also human and you've had lifetimes where you didn't choose love and you hurt someone or, many people, and you were depressed and drinking a lot and inviting these entities. And now you're ready to clear it to regain sovereignty. But you have to forgive yourself. You have to go through this process of, all of those suppressed emotions and things that you weren't able to process then. And, there's all this healing that takes place. So it can be very complicated, very complex. The work is not so simple, and there's many layers to it, a lot that's hidden that they intend to throw you off. And that's why I say this is an art, because it's like a maze and you follow the maze and have to be very aware and very mindful when you're doing this type of work, because it's like, you can think you're making progress, but you're not. And also, one more thing that I just wanted to say, the entities, they live here, they're everywhere. Earth is their home, just like it is for us. So when you're seeing them on people or out and about, it's not about clearing them and removing them. Like I said in the beginning, it's more about learning to coexist, but it's not possible to coexist if you're open to these energies still. That's not coexisting. That's a codependency and an attachment. And I had this friend that was part of the cult community, and her way of coping was she actually caught it before I did, removed herself from the community, and that was it. Book shut. What didn't deal with any of it at all. She just closed the door on this teacher, and that was that. So all of the manipulation that was done to her during the time of, the relationship with this group, it's all still there. And she wound up working with a reptilian manifestation coach, which was very obvious to me. Like, this person was working with black magic to get her clients to have success. And I saw the reptile in her immediately. And I was back and forth of, do I tell her, because it seems like she's just now perpetuating the cycle of moving from one dark teacher to the next. And I did wind up telling her. And her response was basically this, more just like new age BS to me, which is like, we have to learn to love them and coexist with them. And there's, I can be in these classes and not be affected. And it's like, yeah, if you're sovereign, but you're not. And I remember her saying to me, like, I am sovereign and I choose sovereignty. And like, no, sovereignty is not, I'm not going to look at my shit and I'm just going to carry on in my delusion. Sovereignty is looking at it and doing the hard work and choosing yourself over and over and over until then you really are sovereign. And then you can decide if you want to learn from a reptilian money coach, or you're probably going to realize that this isn't a match at all. But because whatever, you get what I'm saying. So they live here, they exist. We have to accept that, but it doesn't mean that we have to accept them within. We have to just accept that this is their home, not that they're allowed access to us. I personally feel like it's impossible to live harmoniously with them until we have sovereignty, because they don't respect boundaries. Like, we can live harmoniously, they can't. And because they can't, if we are not solid in our own sense of self, they take advantage of that. It's just how they operate, it's how they are. So they attach to us to many places, our organs, our chakras, other astral bodies, fragments of our consciousness, other realms, dimensions, our thoughts, emotions, memories. I find them everywhere. And in 2022, I was trying to figure out what was wrong with my womb and why I wasn't bleeding. And I had a friend, and she was she didn't clear, but she was really good at spotting it. And she was the only one to catch this, despite all of the healers that I went to figure out why I'm not bleeding. And she was like, you have an entity in your womb. And it took me 1 year to get it out. And so, like I said, sometimes the entity removal will be easy, sometimes not so much. And you just have to surrender and follow the steps you need to take to extract it. And so I was sitting in medicine, and I knew about the entity, but I wasn't thinking about it going into ceremony. And I started to get really sick, and I was feeling the medicine working throughout the whole body, but then also in the womb. And I remember feeling like my organs were being like lifted from each other and like shaken really quick. And then I started to see the entity. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe it. This is coming out. And it was this little ball, maybe not little, but a ball. It was like wrapped in a ball, and it was like a gray black color. And as it was leaving my system, all of these like big mechanical-ish like tentacles started to come out, and it started to expand. And the medicine was carrying it away. And what I was getting as it was leaving was that I gave this entity a home and a place, a safe space, which was my womb, because it was lost. And as it was leaving, it was like reaching for me, and I was reaching for it. And I felt sad. And I was just like, why do I miss this entity? Like, it needed to go. And I remember asking the medicine, like, please don't hurt it. Please, help it. And she was just like, I'll take it somewhere where it won't go back, to where it came from. I felt like it was scared. And, that brings up this good point as well, where not every entity has negative intention and is this evil force. Some of them are lost and confused. And I'd like to think that my ex is one of those entities. And the one in my womb was as well. So another entity removal was the next day. And this one was even more intense. I was violently ill, my whole body, so sick. And eventually I saw it. I didn't know what was happening to me at the time. I didn't know it was an entity removal. I was just violently sick and just trying to breathe. And it was like this distorted dragon that was really deeply embedded in my blueprint. And then I got really sick after, and that was another entity removal that, yeah, I felt like I needed the medicine for. Now that I've cleared all this gunk out of my system, my gifts are a lot stronger. There are a lot of things now that I felt like I would have needed medicine for in the past that I'm able to clear without it in session, which is really cool. And I know there are some clients too that are like, that felt like ayahuasca. I'm like, same. So for you guys as well, don't be hard on yourself. They're suppressing the exact abilities, you need to be able to remove it. And it's not easy. And even in session today with a client, she has a lot of attachments that came from dabbling in magic, not even black magic, just magic in previous lifetimes as an oracle, as someone in the mystery schools. And there was a lot of it was clearing really easily, and there was one that was giving me a really hard time, and it was a witch. And every single thing that I was doing to try to remove her, to contain her, was just like breaking through all of them. And I was kind of realizing, like, wow, she's got some power. And she wouldn't leave. And it was this whole thing, right, that we're going through of, okay, what is the root? Like, what is she holding on to within you that we want to identify and work on that instead of trying to battle her? And it wound up being this shadow aspect of self that it's like she knows she did this as in allowed these beings in and felt a lot of shame and was almost like hiding because maybe not wanting to take responsibility. So just kind of like another example of it can be really tricky and challenging, and it's okay to ask for help. And speaking of today, like there was one more thing. Okay. So the next session, and honestly, it just feels like it's this week. The theme is entity removal, because that feels like it's all I've been doing all week. So I guess the timing of this is, yeah, aligned. So we're working through some things. We're connecting to shadow aspects, and we start to pivot a little bit to do some subconscious clearing, because I felt like a lot of the back and forth in the mind was coming from that space. And before she could tune in, or she was trying to tune in, and was met with the serpent. And she was like, I don't know, like I like serpents, so to me it's okay. And we're like, okay, let's just kind of put a pin in that for now and try again. She tried again, and then she was seeing reptilians. So I'm like, okay, they've infested your subconscious. That's the message I'm getting. The snake came back, and she had put together, she was like, oh, interesting. This serpent came in. I thought it was a positive thing. But right after that, I fell into the party scene a little bit too hard, and it kind of took me on this wrong path. And we're kind of putting together that this serpent is an entity that has entered, that has manipulated her timelines. And of course, right, everything playing out as it's supposed to. But it's now time to extract and remove that entity and close that chapter. And realizing it's contributing to all of these things that she's, working through. So just last thing, just to tie into this most recent ayahuasca experience for me, I in the one where I cleared the dragon and I don't know, I kind of called it like my child, because it kind of felt like that, the little ball that was in my womb. There was this girl on the retreat, and I remember when we went around in our opening circle, or whatever you want to call it, and I was like, oh my gosh, we are really similar. And I thought I would really connect with her. And, a couple of days go by, and she dismisses me and didn't speak to me at all, but was friendly with everyone else. And it really bothered me and really upset me. And I remember like talking to the facilitators about it, and like, what do I do and how do I handle this? And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to be the bigger person and just like start the conversation with her. And, that night at dinner, we sat next to each other and we were talking about star seeds. And she was like, yeah, I feel most connected to the Anunnaki. Like that's who I connect with. And like just this light bulb went off of like, this makes so much sense why she wouldn't give me the time of day and why I felt all this energy toward her. They don't like me. therefore, like, she's feeling that, and maybe she is one, or maybe they're in her field. I don't know. And then the next day, in a day ceremony, where I feel like we kind of broke the ice, she comes up to me. We're both still kind of on medicine, her more than me. And she asks to give me a hug. And I'm thinking, yeah, great. And the hug was weird. And she's like kind of rubbing me. And she was like, "You're just misunderstood. You just think people don't understand you." She's like, "It's okay." I'm like, that was really rude. And to note also, I was like laying there. I was feeling so good. I had like flowers in my hair. It's just like, way to like really try to bring me down. I knew, like, I understood, this is more about her than it is me, but it upset me. And then in our integration circle that night, in front of everyone, just called me out saying, like, "Yeah, I felt an entity in your back. Like, you should probably do something about that." And I was just like, okay. And I knew she was right. It's just like the way it was delivered was not cool. And it was a hard pill to swallow too, because I didn't want to believe it, but I knew she was right. So that was March 2023. Now we're in May 2024. So over a year of knowing this thing is in my back, and it cleared in, I want to say, like the third or fourth ceremony this time around. And again, like, the medicine was working through me. I felt a little sick and my back was on fire. And then the entity starts to come out, and it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, bigger than the Maloka that we were sitting in. It was the most massive entity I have ever seen, period, on other people, on myself. And the medicine helped me clear it. Where did it come from? It came from my ex-mentor. She put it in me when I was living at her house back in October of 2022. And for those of you who know her, who are listening, it was where my wings are, like the shoulder blades. And if you know her, you know the obsession with the wings. So it just, yeah, because I was like, this doesn't feel super old, but like, where did this come from? And the medicine was like, yeah, you were sleeping in her house. Um, so that's gone. And there's one more that I need to clear. It is right now contained. It has no power, but it is the spirit of, like, the dark mother, which is basically, the way I look at it, as my ex-mentor is like a spawn of this bigger energy that is like the feminine version of the Antichrist. And I saw it. I've told you guys about this in the Tepescoite ceremony that I did back in the spring, and how I saw like the dark goddess. So as the masculine version of that, which was in my back, was clearing, I remember saying to the medicine, like, I don't want to go another 4 to 5 months with this in me. Like, what, I want it gone. What am I supposed to do about it? And what we did was contain it. So it's unable to move. It's in like this, I guess you could call it a ball of light, but it's, it's more than just a ball of light, and it's buried in my consciousness. And when the time comes for it to be removed, the medicine will help me to bring it forward, and we will clear it. Other than that, I feel like I've gotten most of the attachments out. And sometimes there are like hundreds of them, like just entities that are moving at once, that are like, sometimes you hear their screams. It's a little gnarly. Other times they're, smaller, lower conscious. But the point is that there is a method to all of this, and an art and a structure to it. And hopefully this kind of helped a little bit, maybe put some pieces together, things that you maybe weren't looking at, or were missing, or weren't aware of, that you can incorporate into your own practices and your own healing. And I'm always here if you do feel like there is a bigger attachment, you want some clarity, you have questions, you want to know like, hey, can you help me with this? Or is this something for ayahuasca or for plant medicine? And speaking of, for anyone who wants to sit with medicine, who wants to have this experience in a place and with a tribe that is safe and has my stamp of approval, there are two options. One is with the Yawanawa. They are from Brazil. I sat with them back in Guatemala. Some of you might remember. They are hosting a retreat in November. It's November 4th to 14th. There are three ceremonies that will take place there in their sacred village. Lots of music classes. So you're going to their homeland, which is a whole activation within itself, even without medicine. Message me if you want details on that. So the second, they're in Colombia. This is the Kofan tribe. This is mainly who I've been sitting with over the last 4 years, who I've done most of my ceremonies with. It's a retreat center outside of Medellin, and they have retreats happening monthly, multiple a month, actually. And the Taita is amazing. He is more than well equipped to handle my situation. He knows everything. He's, this is my, I've done multiple ceremonies with him now. He's seen the black magic. He's seen the change in me. He's been a big part of the change in me. And I asked him, the last time I was there, can I share this place with everyone? And can I bring my people, my clients, those that are in these similar, situations that have this very strong black magic on them. And he was like, absolutely, I can help. Just give me a heads up so I know they're coming. And there's just a lot of care between the Taita and his apprentice and the facilitation, because it's tough. There are a lot of beautiful people that are in these retreats with me that are not working through what I'm working through. Like they're working through really profound things, but it does not dabble in the unseen, let alone, dark forces and evil spirits. So it's really nice to have someone who is absolutely very well equipped, who is, offering also for me to bring those that are just in a similar position to me. So the name of the place is called LAWAYRA, and it's in Fredonia, Colombia. I will link their website in the show notes, and message me if you have any questions. And then also stay tuned for the dates that I'll be going. It will most likely be in October at this point, maybe September, probably October. All right. I feel complete. I hope this was helpful. I hope you learned something. As always, we'll take it to the chat if you're not already in the Beyond the Veil chat for further discussion, questions, and I am also happy to support with one-on-one work. I am going to be teaching a psychic development class in July. So for anyone who feels they would like extra support with protection while we, work through these things, there will be a 2-part series on that. All right. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye.